Have you ever judged someone at first glance without knowing you were laughing at the future owner of everything you stand on? In a world drunk on appearances and dripping with hidden cruelty, one moment of arrogance can destroy everything you think you own. Watch carefully, because after today, you might never look at a stranger the same way again. Amara Lewis pushed open the heavy glass door of Maison du Soleil, the crisp San Francisco wind curling behind her like a forgotten whisper. Her simple gray dress fluttering slightly against the polished marble floors. Heads turned almost in unison, a sea of designer suits and glittering dresses, pausing mid-sentence to drink in the sight of her, their gazes sharp slicing. Judging Vincent Marlowe, the restaurant's manager, leaned toward the maitre d' with a smirk that didn't bother to hide its disdain. "She's lost or broke, maybe both," he muttered. The maitre d' chuckled dryly, glancing at Amara's worn leather flats and plain handbag. "Should we tell her there's a dress code for royalty?" Another server, a thin blonde man polishing wine glasses behind the bar, snickered. "Bet. She's here to drop off resumes. Not money." Amara said nothing, her posture serene, her eyes deep pools of quiet defiance. She walked with a grace that needed no silk or satin to announce it, finding her way to a corner booth, half shielded by a towering plant. She slid into the seat without waiting to be seated, her hands folding neatly in her lap. The buzz of the room resumed, but it was different now. A thin layer of mockery tainting the air. A table of young tech executives pointed at her and laughed behind their menus. A woman draped in Chanel whispered loudly to her companion, "We must be offering soup kitchens now." Vincent adjusted his cufflinks and strode across the dining room, his steps heavy with disdain, though he kept his distance for now, letting the venom drip slow and deliberate. Amara's dark eyes scanned the gold-tipped menus, her face unreadable, her presence a stone thrown into a still-polished pond, sending ripples of discomfort that no amount of champagne could smooth. The waiter sauntered toward Amara's table with exaggerated slowness, his tray balanced lazily on one hand, a sneer curling his lip as he dropped the menu onto her table with a loud slap that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. The pages fluttered open like a wounded bird, and he didn't bother to hide his disdain. A group of well-dressed patrons at a nearby table snickered their Rolexes, flashing under the golden lights, as one of them, a man in a navy Tom Ford blazer, lifted his phone and discreetly filmed Amara, captioning it with a smirk, "Gourmet menu for the working class, LOL." The flicker of the phone's screen caught in the reflection of Amara's dark eyes, but she remained perfectly still, her fingers tracing the worn edge of the menu, pretending not to notice more whispers floated through the air like poisoned darts. "Wrong side of town," murmured a woman in pearls to her diamond-draped friend. "Probably thinks a $1,000 bottle of wine comes with free refills," chuckled another man, their laughter cold and heavy. A server passing by deliberately bumped Amara's table, nearly spilling her water, muttering under his breath, but loud enough for half the room to hear, "Charity case." The words landed like stones thrown into the still pool of her dignity. Amara's shoulders tensed for half a heartbeat, but her face remained serene, her gaze unbroken, steady, unshakable. There was a quiet storm gathering inside her silent but immense something none of them could see, yet something none of them could ever hope to extinguish. Vincent straightened his jacket as he crossed the floor with heavy, deliberate steps, the crowd parting instinctively, as if sensing the cruelty about to unfold. He didn't slow when he reached Amara's table, his voice dripping with false politeness, but sharpened to a blade. I'm afraid you'll need to leave, he said loud enough for the nearest tables to hear and smirk. We maintain a certain standard for our clientele. His eyes flicked to her simple dress, her worn flats, the invisible but undeniable evidence of her unworthiness. A ripple of laughter rolled through the room, like a slow, cruel tide. Somewhere a phone was lifted higher, its lens focusing gleefully on the scene. The words, "Live now," blinking in the corner of the screen. Amara said nothing. Her chin tilted slightly upward as she absorbed the humiliation. A group of young men at the bar hooted and clapped mockingly, one shouting, "Give her a doggy bag on the way out." Another voice, sharp and shrill from a table near the window, added, "This isn't a shelter, sweetheart." Vincent gave a small, satisfied smile. Emboldened by the cruelty around him, he motioned subtly to a server, who approached and pushed Amara's chair back with the edge of his tray, a gesture that was part insult, part command. Amara rose slowly, her movements fluid and composed, as if the jeering didn't touch her at all. Her face was a mask of cool indifference, but her eyes, dark and fierce, sliced through the laughter like a silent blade. The maitre d' crossed his arms triumphantly by the host stand, as Amara stood alone, the center of a theater of scorn. Phones captured every second, some shouting for her removal, others laughing as if they were witnessing a spectacle designed for their entertainment. Vincent stepped back smugly, as if dusting his hands off a completed chore. But Amara, with a grace they could never understand, simply turned her back straight, her gaze unfaltering, and walked slowly toward the door, every step echoing against the marble like a silent indictment, not of her shame, but of theirs. As Amara reached for the heavy brass handle of the restaurant door, the room still thick with sneers and smirks, the front entrance swung open with a gust of sharp spring air. Standing there, framed by the sunlight, was Richard Lewis, a man whose name whispered power in San Francisco, owner of the newly rebranded Lewis Hospitality Group that had quietly acquired this entire restaurant chain 6 months ago, his silver hair neatly combed back, his tailored coat hanging crisply from his broad shoulders. His sharp blue eyes swept the room in an instant, freezing every sneer, every smirk, every raised phone in midair. He took 2 measured steps inside and said, in a voice both calm and thunderous, "What's going on here?" Vincent, suddenly pale, stumbled forward, fumbling his words. "Just, handling a disturbance, sir. She, But he faltered when Richard's gaze locked on Amara, something flashing in his expression that no one around them could interpret. Yet Amara, without a word, pulled out her phone with a steady hand, tapping the screen once, and held it up high enough for everyone to see. The image glowed bright and undeniable. A photo of Amara, radiant and smiling, standing with Richard Lewis, his arm wrapped proudly around her shoulders, captioned simply, "My daughter, my pride." A gasp rippled through the room, sharp and immediate. Vincent's mouth hung open. One of the waitresses dropped a tray, glasses shattering across the marble floor. The laughter died so completely that even the clink of a single fork sounded deafening. Richard strode forward without hesitation, crossing the distance in 5 quick strides, and without pause, he wrapped his arms around Amara in a fierce, fatherly embrace. Right there, in the middle of the ornate restaurant. His voice, low but clear, rumbled against the stunned silence. "I've been looking for you, pumpkin." The room seemed to tilt every insult, every sneer, every live-streamed humiliation, crashing back onto the heads of those who had delivered them. Richard kissed Amara's temple and turned his gaze a blade, sweeping across the gathered crowd, and for the first time that afternoon, it was the diners, the managers and the servers who looked away, who felt small, who felt the unbearable weight of their own ugliness, reflected back at them. Richard kept his arm around Amara's shoulders as he turned to face the stunned restaurant, his voice calm, but each word hitting like a crack of thunder. "I suppose now is as good a time as any," he said, his eyes never leaving the crowd that had moments ago sneered at his daughter, "to introduce you to your new co-owner." Gasps echoed against the high ceilings. Forks clattered against plates. A woman in a pearl necklace visibly staggered back into her chair. Richard's voice did not waver, did not soften. "This," he said, squeezing Amara's shoulder gently, "is Amara Lewis, my daughter, and as of last month, the owner of 45% of Lewis Hospitality Group." Silence fell like a guillotine, a silence so heavy it seemed to press down on every heart in the room. Vincent, the manager who had so proudly thrown insults, looked as if the floor itself might open up beneath him, his lips moving without sound. A waiter, the same one who had nudged Amara's chair, with disdain, dropped the bottle of wine he had been holding, the red liquid bleeding across the polished floor, like a wound around them. The other diners shifted uncomfortably, their shame a visible shroud. Richard's gaze swept across them all, unflinching, unmerciful. "The woman you mocked, the woman you humiliated, the woman you thought unworthy of your precious space," he said, each word slicing the room into thinner pieces, "is now your boss, your investor, your future." A heavy, disbelieving breath moved through the crowd, some diners grabbing their purses, their coats desperate to disappear from the disaster they had helped create. Others, frozen in place, unable to tear their eyes away from the reckoning unfolding before them. Amara said nothing, her silence more powerful than any speech, her presence more commanding than any title. She simply stood there beside her father, head high, as the entire restaurant, once so eager to diminish her, now drowned in their own humiliation. Richard's voice sliced through the silence, colder than winter steel. "Vincent," he said without raising his voice, but making the entire room flinch, "your time here is over." Vincent, pale and sweating, fumbled for words, but Richard held up a hand, silencing him like a slammed door. "Hand over your employee badge." Richard ordered, his tone absolute now. Vincent's fingers shook as he tore the lanyard from around his neck, placing it on a nearby table like a man surrendering his last weapon. Richard turned next to the staff, who had smirked, whispered, and shoved his eyes hard as iron. "Anyone who participated in the humiliation of my daughter is finished," he said, scanning their faces. "Consider this your last night under this roof." Gasps rippled through the small gathering of servers and hostesses. A young woman who had laughed cruelly at Amara just hours ago now sobbed silently into her apron. Richard's fury was measured, but it burned all the more fiercely because of its control. Amara stood by her expression, unreadable, regal, above it all. Then Richard faced the dining room, his gaze sweeping the tables like a judge passing sentence. "And as for our valued guests," he said, his voice dripping with contempt, "anyone here who took pleasure in filming mocking or live streaming a young woman's humiliation will find themselves banned permanently from every establishment owned by Lewis Hospitality Group." He paused, letting the horror of those words sink in. "Your names," he added, "have already been collected." Murmurs rose, a few desperate patrons abandoning their meals, scrambling for the exit, like rats leaving a sinking ship outside the restaurant. Camera flashes began to ignite the street. News vans pulling up to the curb like vultures to carry in headlines were already exploding online. Elite French bistro exposed owner's daughter. Humiliated by racist staff. High-end dining or high-end disgrace. Lewis family shakes the industry. The restaurant that had once been a playground for the city's elite now stood stripped raw naked under the ruthless scrutiny of a world that had seen too much injustice to stay silent. While the guilty scattered like leaves in a storm, Richard turned back toward the few who had chosen kindness, without knowing who Amara was. His voice softened, yet carried with it the weight of gratitude. But not everyone here forgot their humanity, he said, motioning gently to a small figure near the bar. It was Elise, the shy server with trembling hands, the one who had quietly filled Amara's glass and offered a whispered apology amidst the sea of cruelty. Elise froze her eyes wide. "Come here," Richard said, and she obeyed, moving as if in a dream. "You," he announced to the room, "will manage the newest flagship branch opening downtown next month." Gasps erupted again, but this time they weren't from outrage. They were from awe. Elise clutched her apron, her mouth falling open, tears springing to her eyes. Richard smiled a rare and genuine smile, "Because you showed heart when no one else would." Then he turned to the kitchen, to a young sous chef with ink still fresh on his apron, Malik, who had dared to smile and offer Amara a glass of water when others had turned their backs. "And you," Richard said, "will train in Paris at our partner culinary institute." Malik dropped his ladle in shock. Cheers erupted from a few brave souls still standing inside. It was not just a reward, it was a message carved in stone, a new foundation being laid on kindness, not cruelty. Amara watched them with warmth in her eyes, her hand resting gently over her heart. In a world that tried to measure worth by appearance, these two had proved that character still mattered, and Richard was making sure the world would never forget it. The next morning, under the soft wash of the San Francisco sun, a small press conference gathered outside the restaurant. Reporters buzzed, cameras flashed, but the center of gravity was unmistakable. It was Amara, standing poised, elegant in her simple navy dress, her hair pulled back, her voice calm but resonant as she stepped to the microphone. She didn't need a prepared statement. The truth burned bright within her. "I didn't come here today to demand respect because of my wealth," she said, her hazel eyes sweeping over the crowd. "I deserve it simply because I am a human being." The crowd hushed, the weight of her words sinking deep. No one should have to prove their worth with dollar signs. She continued, each syllable slicing through the heavy morning air. "Kindness, dignity, decency. These are not commodities to be bought. They are the minimum we owe each other." Murmurs of agreement rolled through the gathered onlookers. Amara paused, letting the silence etch her point into the hearts before her. "I am not here to retaliate," she said. "I am here because change must begin somewhere, and sometimes that means holding a mirror up to the ugliness we try to ignore." She stepped back, and Richard Lewis, her father, took her place at the microphone, his broad shoulders straight with pride, his silver hair catching the sun. "My daughter does not just inherit my fortune," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She inherits something far more precious, something this world desperately needs." He turned to look at Amara, his gaze softening. "She inherits the legacy of self-respect and the courage to demand it for every soul who has ever been overlooked." The applause that broke out was not just polite, it was thunderous. It was the sound of walls cracking, of something new and beautiful beginning to rise. On the rooftop of the new restaurant, where the glass railings caught every shard of morning light, Amara stood alone, her simple cotton dress billowing in the gentle San Francisco breeze below her. The bay sparkled like 1,000 dreams, waking up and above. The sun crowned her with a soft halo of gold. A silent coronation of dignity reclaimed her gaze, stretched far beyond the skyline into a future she was helping shape, with nothing but resilience, kindness, and quiet power. In the streets below, the news of her story had already traveled fast, sparking conversations, shifting hearts, inspiring countless strangers. One such story unfolded just a few blocks away, where a young Latino boy named Diego, who had once been mocked at a luxury store for wearing worn-out sneakers, now stood proudly at the entrance of that same store, welcomed warmly by a new manager who had seen Amara's interview and vowed to change. Diego was offered an internship that day. His dream of becoming a fashion designer, no longer a whisper, but a real path. It wasn't just a win for Amara. It was a crack in the walls of prejudice that so many had long called unbreakable, standing there, with the city breathing around her. Amara closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the past lift from her shoulders, not erased, but transformed into something powerful, something lasting. The wind carried her silent vow into the rising day, that no matter how simple the fabric wrapped around her, her spirit would always shine far brighter than any gilded surface the world mistook for worth. As the city stretched awake under the warmth of a new sun, Amara stood quietly in the marble-lined atrium of the restaurant. Reporters and cameras now gathered, not to feast on scandal, but to hear a truth long buried by glitter and prejudice. Her voice, when it came, was steady low, but powerful enough to cut through the noise of centuries. Respect is not worn like a designer dress, and dignity is not measured by the weight of your wallet. She said, every word striking, like a slow, deliberate bell. You can wear coarse linen live simply and still have a dignity that outshines any diamond. The room fell utterly silent. Even the air seemed to lean closer. She let the weight of the words settle before continuing. Today is not just about me. It's about all of us, about choosing to see the soul before the surface, about lifting each other instead of tearing down. She looked around, her gaze, meeting strangers and skeptics alike. Let's build a world where kindness speaks louder than status, where fairness walks into every room before judgment does. Her final words rose clear and unforgettable. You can strip away gold, fame, fortune, but the worth of a human being. She paused, her hand pressing lightly over her heart, is something no one can steal, no matter how hard they try. The room erupted, not into applause, but a stunned, reverent silence. The kind of silence that blooms when something true finally pierces through the walls we build. And as Amara walked out into the sunlight, the wind lifting her simple dress once again, the story was no longer hers. Alone, it was a call, a mirror, a fire that would burn quietly, but relentlessly, in the hearts of all who heard it. The ones who laughed are gone. The ones who sneered are forgotten. But the woman they humiliated now owns the very walls that echoed with their cruelty. Remember this: every time you mock a stranger, you might be kneeling before their empire tomorrow. In a world where appearances lie, only dignity stands immortal. Think twice, or be the next name written in shame.